Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's special podcast. I'm super honored to have Professor Ervand Abrahamian join my podcast. Professor, thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you very much, Pygmy.
Yeah. So last time we had a podcast kind of discussing the influence of the 1953 coup on the current Iranian political system. Actually, as you know, probably follow the news, the current situation is pretty bleak. Like you have all the protests on the street. I heard some protester got killed by the current regime, and there's definitely a huge crackdown on that. Can you just briefly tell us, like, what's your perspective on the current situation kind of going on in Iran?
Well, the underlying problem for this regime is that it came to power in 79, a great deal of popularity. So it had a lot
Hmm.
of legitimacy. It was probably the most popular revolution that's occurred in world history.
Hmm.
But since then, the regime has narrowed its base by being more and more sectarian. So
Hmm.
it's cut away, Islamic reformists, radicals, even people from within the regime, if they didn't quite follow the supreme leader's line, they were marginalized. So it has lost its, you could say, its legitimacy. Not totally, but it's from, I would say, from 80% support, which it originally had, it's probably narrowed down to 15%.
Yeah,
So the underlying is the problem of legitimacy. But of course, on top of that, what is the sparked off the present problem is the sanctions,
hmm
the incredible sanctions that have been on for a long time, and basically they've ruined the economy.
yeah,
Um, so often it's seen, the question often is, if Iran moderated its policy or it
hmm
behaved better, somehow the sanctions would be lifted and things
yeah,
would improve. So it's often the question, the onus is put on the Iranian government. I mean, it's a despicable government, there's no question
yeah,
about that. But whether the real driver of the car or the policy is really Iran or outside powers is
exactly.
the issue.
Yeah.
So
So,
I think the real problems are really in Washington and Tel Aviv, where they are the ones who've imposed these economic, incredible sanctions.
yeah,
I don't think any other country suffered the similar sanctions. But then the question arises, what is their motivation? What
exactly.
do they want?
Yeah.
And there, it's fuzzy. So, a lot of liberals in America think, well, it's pressure so that Iran will behave better on the nuclear issue.
Yeah.
Uh, but Iran did actually sign a very good agreement with
Yeah.
Obama.
JCPOA. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm not, that's not, I don't think, the issue. Then the question becomes, uh, the avowed reason the Americans give is they want regime change. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Usually, when you talk about the term regime change, is a euphemism for what used to be used as coup d'etat, a
Yeah.
military coup. That's fallen out of fashion. It's considered sort of too imperialistic. So that
Exactly.
it was coined regime change. But to have a regime change, you need to have an alternative to the regime to be able to take over.
Hmm.
And I don't see that there. Basically, you have mass demonstrations, a lot of people there protesting, but there is no organization, no even informal system
Hmm.
that you can claim is going to be an alternative government.
Yeah.
I think people, not necessarily in Washington, but in Tel Aviv, are quite aware of that. So I don't think they're deluding themselves into thinking that there's going to be a regime change.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, what is their agenda? And I fear their agenda is basically dismantling of the regime, breakdown of the whole state structure, as they did with other countries.
Yeah, like Libya, right? Or like Iraq.
Iraq, Libya, basically Syria too,
Yeah.
Yugoslavia. That's been very much a policy of a foreign sort of, I would say, still imperial powers. Is if you can't control a state, ways to deal with it is to dismantle it.
Yeah, I think many of my listeners are familiar with the 1953 coup against the Mossadegh. I think you write a very famous book. I'm going to put the link in the description of this podcast as well. So looking back, was that 1979 Islamic Revolution essentially a reaction to that event? I think your answer is pretty definitively yes, right?
Yeah, it's not a direct, 53 to 79. It's not that
Hmm.
simple. But I would say the origins of the 79 revolution go back to 53.
Hmm.
Because what happened was here you had a national hero, basically,
Hmm.
hero, Mossadegh, who was not only seen as a national figurehead, uh, epitomizing Iranian nationalism in oil nationalization, but he
Hmm.
was also actually a child of the constitutional revolution earlier in the century.
Yeah.
So in many ways, he had a sort of charismatic power, uh, and his overthrow by the CIA MI6 really not only destroyed Mossadegh, but it brought to power the Shah, who
Yeah,
from the beginning lacked legitimacy.
exactly.
And the Shah actually is often portrayed as sort of a Hamlet-like figure who didn't know what he was doing. But
Yeah.
in fact, if you go back to the documents before the 53 coup, he is quite perceptive. He keeps on telling the British and the Americans that if I go against Mossadegh, an oil nationalization,
Uh,
I will lose legitimacy, not just
yeah.
itself, the whole monarchy will lose legitimacy. So he knew that if he basically participated in the coup, he would be undermining his own authority. So
Yeah.
he knew that from 53 on, from the beginning.
Yeah.
So what he often did after 53, and there's a long gap of obviously 53, 70, he was always trying to gain legitimacy.
Support, right?
And one way, I mean, continually, the first 10 years was to have, at those days, was called modernization,
Yeah.
socioeconomic reform. And here it was actually Walt Rostow, uh, the theorist of modernization,
Hmm.
argued that the way to prevent revolutions is to have socio-economic modernization.
Exactly.
And he did that. But what that did was actually it expanded the two major classes that had always opposed the monarchy.
Uh,
That was the intelligentsia, the modern middle class, and the industrial working class.
uh,
So that he was in a way socially undermining the monarchy by modernization.
yeah.
Another thing he did was part of that was then have the so-called White Revolution.
Yeah.
Well, then he could argue that, Mossadegh didn't carry out land reform. I'm carrying out major land reform. I'm a
Yeah.
revolutionary. And even took the language of dialectics, that he was a dialectical relationship with his people. He
Yeah.
transformed the White Revolution into Shah's People's Revolution. This
Yeah.
was a way of actually further getting some sort of legitimacy.
Yeah.
What it did was actually again undermined him
Uh,
because the old regime, the old feudal class, the landlords, the tribal chiefs,
hmm.
had been the backbone of the monarchy.
Yeah.
And land reform, in fact, destroyed that
Yeah.
class. And it was supposed to create a small landed farming class that would support the regime.
Yeah.
But that it failed. Initially, that was the idea of it, of the white revolution.
I'm
But
just curious why, I mean, if you look at the communist movement, like in Soviet Union or China or other like similar communist country, like I think the policy he adopt is very similar to those. Like they take down all the farm like landlords and those people who have the land and then distribute those land to the farmer who hasn't. And that should be a popular policy towards those lower income class, right?
if it's done properly, it would succeed. I mean, it succeeded in Japan,
Yeah.
actually, it's a number of other countries, but in Iran, it didn't succeed because they never followed it up. Because it's
Hmm.
not enough just giving farmers land. You need support system. You need
Mm.
basically uh, help for agriculture. And they, after a while, in fact, the Shah felt so confident this transferred from farm families to encouraging agro businesses,
Hmm.
plantations. So they started actually dispossessing a lot of small farmers in favor of agro businesses. So
Yeah.
they failed to create a social base in the countryside. Another way the Shah tried to get legitimacy was this idea of imperial monarchy, that he was
Yeah.
a grand emperor in the line of 2,500 years of history,
Yeah.
going to pre-Islamic Iran, the Persepolis celebrations of 2,500 years. And that further undermined the system because one thing it did is it seemed for the clergy like an
Hmm.
attack on religion
Hmm.
because going back to pre-Islamic
Yeah.
Iran as the core of Iran, and that was seen as a way of trying to undermine people's faith.
Hmm.
But also, I mean, part of the imperial ambitions was spending a lot of money on arms. The Shah was the biggest buyer of American arms.
Yeah.
For many people, this was waste of money, but it was also proof to people that the Shah was actually put in power to serve American interests.
I see.
Uh, to remember, there's a time after Vietnam, Nixon created what was known as the Nixon Doctrine.
Hmm.
And Nixon basically was saying, we don't have the money to police the world. We need local policemen, local
Yeah.
gendarmes.
Yeah.
And the Shah quickly appointed himself as a local gendarme for America in the Gulf region.
Yeah.
So for many people in Iran, this was direct proof that yes, he is a stooge of the United States. Otherwise, why is he wasting all this money we need for social programs on ultra modern weaponry from United States?
Hmm.
So all these things further undermined his legitimacy. So when you came to actually set the crisis in 78, 79, he had no social support.
Yeah.
Oh. And often, actually, with the reports, CIA reports, State Department, they say, well, you know, he's done so many things to actually make himself unpopular, inflation, let's say, torture. Those all things that were true, but the real reason was that it had lacked legitimacy. And
Yeah.
obviously, the Americans couldn't admit to themselves that, in fact, the root cause of the problem was at 53.
Yeah. Someone compared the Islamic Republic to a betrayed revolution that happened in 1979, right? Like similar to like historical analogies when a monarchy is overthrown only to be replaced by a different form of authoritarian regime. Is this current crisis a direct consequence of the removal of the secular democratic options like Mossadegh in decades ago? Because basically they destroyed that benign democratic option, even that class completely during that crackdown era.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's a feeling that people were taken for a ride.
Hmm.
Because if you read Khomeini's press conferences. He gave a lot in France before the eve of the revolution. It was always basically that we're offering freedom, everyone.
Uh,
The Shah is a dictator. We'll be exactly opposite. He even
yeah,
said, I'm an old man. I'm just, but hope to after the revolution will go back to my studies at seminary. The image given to the public
uh,
that it was going to be the monarchy will be replaced by a democratic republic.
yeah,
Now, the real thinking of Khomeini was in fact a clerical state, and
yeah,
he had written given a series of lectures on what was called Velayat Faqih, which means literally the authority of the clergy.
hmm,
Never mentioned that during the revolution.
yeah,
It was this book was published under a pseudonym.
uh-huh,
There was quite actually sort of Machiavellian strategy to saying, well, no, this wasn't really his work. It was someone else had written it, or that, these are student notes of lectures he gave in Iraq. And, everyone knows that student lecture notes are not reliable.
yeah, exactly.
So there was no actually open admittance that this was his thinking.
Hmm.
After the revolution, once the Shah was gone completely, Khomeini was in power,
Hmm.
then they revealed the notion of Velayat Faqih, clerical power. So
Mm.
they transformed the idea of a democratic republic to a clerical republic. And the
Yeah,
Constitution it's a very complex document, some 160 clauses. But what it does is it's institutionalized the power of the clergy.
yeah,
So I think that what therefore people felt was they were hoodwinked into
yeah,
something that they were not actually demonstrating for, and they ended up with something that was unpalatable. So that is another cause of the regime. Now, if the regime had been willing to open up
hmm,
and have a more liberal interpretation of their own constitution, it would have been more actually viable. But it's
yeah.
over the years, it's got narrower and narrower.
Yeah, I read your book describing that part of the history, and my impression is Khomeini is very good at propaganda. So he say one thing, and a lot of people support him. Even the democratic ones, the liberal ones, they form a huge alliance, kind of supporting him to pass that constitution. And after that, he started all kinds of activity, cracking down each part, and eventually, step by step all the other democratic options has been destroyed. So right now in Iran, like there's no such thing as alliance like Mossadegh was having during the 50s, right? So right now you don't see any kind of liberal organizations existing in Iran.
No, I mean, it's even civil organizations are very basically
Difficult.
pushed.
Yeah.
The only thing people who could organize is the government work within government organizations.
Hmm.
And that's why the protests basically are in the street.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. So, in your view as a historian, like what do you think is a primary factor that determines the destiny of a nation like Iran? Is it like deeply rooted history, culture, ideology, the political system, or the personality of the supreme leader and a lot of like accidental factors that kind of cause into the current state?
well, I mean, all of them basically are a
Hmm.
factor. But in this case, actually, I mean, in this case, the crisis is basically externally, basically
Introduced, right? Yeah.
Israel, and also basically the sanctions.
Hmm.
If there weren't sanctions, I think there would be much more ability for the regime to open up. Uh,
Hmm.
and of course, one argument is often made is if there is more economic development, prosperity, the middle class would be better off, and once the middle class is better off, they would have more power within the state, and
Hmm.
you would have actually more of a you could say uh, regime, that, even if it's clerical, is able to deal with United States and other countries.
Hmm.
So the sanctions basically make the system more intransigent
Yeah.
than open up.
Got it. So the Islamic Republic is actually a unique hybrid of the clerical rules and the limited democratic element. Like Iran has elections, they have the reformist president. However, the recent protests seem to have crossed the threshold. Like the traditional merchants, which is like a key pillar of the 1979 revolution, join in to protest the current existing regime. So do you think this signal a fundamental secular shift in the Iranian civil society that the current system can no longer accommodate?
Yes, I mean the fact that the economy is so bad it is affecting even people who have political influence, like the
Hmm.
bazaar, is showing that is a really serious crisis there.
Hmm.
But the question is, for the regime, what to do, and that's
Yeah.
where their alternatives are actually limited because the people basically making the crisis are not in Iran. It's not the regime. It's basically in Washington and Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, its hand is actually tied. There's not much they can do, like unless the sanctions somehow like got lifted.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't see that happening. So, but
Yeah.
the crisis is going to go on, I think. Uh, if the on one hand, if the regime doesn't collapse, the crisis will be there.
Hmm.
If the regime collapses, there'll be even a worse crisis in that there'll be
Yeah.
a chaos in the country.
I know. So, do you think like the merchants finally turn against the regime due to this hyperinflation happening in Iran? Do you think the regime currently have any sociological base left beyond the military? Like obviously they control the military.
Well, I mean, there might be actually the discontent or protests in the bazaar could be just
Hmm.
a temporary thing because
Um,
for businessmen and shopkeepers, the last thing you want is people burning your shops or your
yeah.
establishments. So if they see the chaos happening, they might even again go back, rally around the regime.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I think like the current Iran president looks like trapped because he promised to listen to the people while the judiciary prepared to do mass trials for those enemies on the street. They think those guys are like foreign infiltrated spies try to overthrow the government. Historically, the Islamic Republic used this reformist president, as a safety valve to release those social pressure. Do you think this safety valve mechanism finally broke in 2026? Because apparently the president is kind of losing the grips of the current protest.
Yeah. I mean, this has happened before too.
Hmm.
Tamim was more reformist. Rouhani in some way was even going back earlier. Rafsanjani, the first president after once actually Khomeini died,
Hmm.
they were more, I would say, open-minded, but they were always stifled by the clerical hierarchy.
Hmm. Yeah.
So this isn't new. I think what could happen is Pezeshkian, the president, is still president,
Hmm.
but he can still, in a way, restrain the clergy and leave it opening so that, people who don't want to actually chaos, they don't want overthrow, might still find someone like Pezeshkian as a reasonable someone from the establishment
Hmm.
to find a way to get out of the crisis.
Yeah. So I think like the 2025 protest was triggered by the economic collapse, right? But the Revolutionary Guards, like the IRGCs, they actually control a massive portion of the economy. So do you think, in your view, like the Islamic Republic actually transformed from a theocracy into a military mafia conglomerate? Basically, you have the army and the Revolutionary Guard control all the different sectors of the important businesses.
in fact, to some extent, they're actually the past stars, the Revolutionary Guards, uh, have less economic control right now than they did about 10 years ago.
Oh, really?
It's in some ways the governments that has tried, and especially I think any reformist
Hmm.
president has in the past and will try to limit the Revolutionary Guard's economic activities. I mean, the model they followed that was actually China after
Hmm.
Mao. That the Red Army had a lot of influence in the economy.
Exactly.
After a while, the government discouraged that and tried to make it more private or state private. Uh, that could happen in Iran.
So I think you have written extensively about the reality of the Pahlavi era, right? And also the 1953 coup. Today, however, we see on internet, right, like a generation of the young Iranians chanting the return of the monarchy and Reza Pahlavi. As a historian, do you view this as a genuine political support for a monarchy, or is this is just an act of desperation because like they haven't been through that horrible, horrible era in the Iranian history?
Well, I don't know how widespread it is. With
Yeah.
the internet, you can have one picture of a guy saying, uh, Pahlavi's return or something
Yeah.
to be projected, and as if this was the popular cry. It's not like in 1978 where you had actually 3 million people in the street
Exactly.
calling for Khomeini. So if that happens, yes, I would say that's serious. But I think the incident here or there, it doesn't prove that.
Yeah.
What has happened in the last 20 years is in the diaspora, there's been a lot of funny money coming into uh, quite actually sophisticated media, especially
Hmm.
movies,
Hmm.
very systematically creating nostalgia for the Pahlavi period.
Yeah.
So there are movies, films, documentaries, and even, it's very simplest thing. Every time you have an image of the Pahlavi era, you have nice, soothing music.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whenever you have from the Islamic Republic, it's very
Yeah.
unpleasant. So the mood is to create a, a mythical past as if everything was fine.
Yeah.
And people forget that actually 78, 79, there were literally 3 million people in the street calling for the end of the Pahlavi. So
Yeah.
it's a systematic, I think, artificial creation.
Yeah.
And funny money originally, I think, came from Saudi Arabia.
Hmm.
But the Saudis are no longer interested in that. So I think
Hmm.
the funny money probably comes from Israel.
Yeah. Do you think like I know Pahlavi in his regime, Israel, Mossad and CIA, they trained the secret police force in the country, right? Help him to find all the protesters and really punish those who want to overthrow the regime or protest in the street, right? So do you think that Israel and maybe the United States they want to have that good old days coming back to Iran, basically put this kind of Reza Pahlavi back in Iran, taking control, become a puppet state?
They might wish that, but I think there's at least the Israeli uh, intelligence, Mossad, I think is aware that that's a mirage. That's not likely
Yeah.
to happen. So,
Mhm.
however much they may talk about return of the Pahlavis, they know that's not in the books.
Yeah. I saw like Reza Pahlavi went on the show and then give a speech to Iranian people and acting like he's going to be the next in line to take control of the regime. Do you think he's out of his mind or like he seriously think that's possible? He has the support of the Western countries.
Well, I think he does probably think that the card is in America's hand, Israel
Yeah.
has. If he basically says what they want, they will put him back into power. But the question is how. Uh,
Yeah.
as I was saying, there's no institution or structure or party in Iran that is going to invite the Shah back to become Shah.
Hmm.
So the only way he can be returned to Iran as Shah is a massive army uh,
Yeah.
occupying the country and putting him back in power. I mean, in the past, whenever you've had a monarchy restored, it's often been through a foreign occupation.
Yeah. That means like US have to put the troops on the ground, like to really occupy Iran for probably decades to have a stable monarchy in place.
Yeah, and that didn't work actually in Iraq.
Iraq, it ended up horribly. So I don't think that there will be any Americans supporting that, like right now, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see the U.S. Having the will or even the ability to mobilize such a army. It would need to be actually a not a unilateral army, but a multinational army.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
If you go back in history, after Napoleon, it's true the Bourbons were returned to France.
hmm
But to return the Bourbons in France, you needed the Tsarist army, the British army, the Prussian army, the
yeah,
Austrian army. So you need a massive, alliance of countries to occupy the country to bring
yeah,
back monarchy. And
exactly.
that's not in the books in Iran.
Yeah. So the current regime is attributing the violence on the street to foreign agents like Mossad and like infiltrators kind of entering from the border. You have written about the paranoid style in the Iranian politics because of the 1953 coup. Does the current leader actually think that I don't know if that's own theories or it's their fear kind of deeply rooted in their mind. They think like every protest is kind of under the foreign direction, which I think it's actually part of them is true because you do see Mike Pompeo went on a conference and saying that congrats to the Iranian people and also the Mossad sitting next to them, like on the street. I think that's partly true, but do you think it's also a cynical propaganda because like they try to not really face the internal problems like they may have in governing the country?
Well, I think both. There's
Mhm.
clearly foreign involvement, especially when guns have appeared.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is that reason for suspicion. But of
Mhm.
course, they're using it. I mean, the
Yeah.
Shah used it too. He constantly was telling the American ambassador and the British ambassador that all these problems are caused by the Soviets.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they would say, no, we have no evidence. Then he turned around and said, oh, it must be the CIA doing this.
Mhm.
Still, the monarchists think that the Shah was overthrown because the Americans wanted him overthrown. So the paranoia is mostly actually among the royalists who have this notion that everything was fine. It was the Americans that overthrew the Shah.
Mhm.
And the Shah actually himself often would say the reason he was getting trouble in the West about human rights was because of the Jewish press.
Yeah.
So if you were looking for someone who's really anti-Semitic in Iran, in the old regime, it was the Shah himself. He has this
Yeah.
idea that somehow the Jews controlled the American press, and that was
Yeah.
because he had said some statements about Palestinians, which
Yeah.
he never meant it because he never wanted a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
But a few statements he'd made, he said, "Oh, that's why the Jewish press is out to get me."
Yeah. So how do you think about, the current, if you go on the social media, YouTube, people on different sides both blame the other, saying like, the Iranian government is saying, oh, all this social unrest are actually foreign actors. They're like spies and the Mossad or other like conspiracy theories. They want to overthrow the regime. They basically bring the weapons into the country, which is part of them is true, right? But the government think that calling those protests the spies gave them the right to really um, commit the massacre, right? Like killing a lot of people on the street. However, the US, if you see President Trump, he's saying, oh, we need to stop the government kind of killing its own civilians. So we are lock and loaded. We're ready to attack Iran to save those protesters. And both of them try to put themselves in a high moral high ground. But actually, from my opinion, like none of them actually have that stand. Like it's a very messy situation in Iran.
Well, when Trump says he is going to intervene to help the demonstrators, I do not know what the mechanism is.
Yeah.
How is that going to happen? I mean, last time there was the bombing, Israelis bombed. They actually bombed the main political prison, Evin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the people who are there are actually people who criticize the regime. So, I mean, the only way intervention I can see is the US and Israel intervening to decapitate the regime.
Hmm.
And then the decapitation of regime doesn't mean change of regime. It means then opening for complete anarchy and destruction of the state. So
Hmm.
that's why I keep on going back to I think the real agenda of both Israel and the United States is disintegration of the state.
Yeah. I kind of see there's many other geopolitical experts believing the same argument you are making. Like basically, the Israel government want the Iranian power to be a dysfunctional state, a rubber state. So basically, you have the internal civil war, unrest, and never really be able to form a strong army and threaten Israel's position in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think that's the agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well. So, do you think the current Iran regime would turn into something like a hermit kingdom, a fully closed security state similar to North Korea? Use a national internet to block out all the other website external to Iran, and also kind of sever the ties with the world, and just maybe doing business with China and Russia to kind of maintain the stability of the regime. Do you think that's possible, like the North Korean mode for Iran?
I don't think that by choice they want to do that, but they
Mhm.
might end up having to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
If there's no willingness on America's part to negotiate some sort of settlement,
Hmm.
they have no choice but to do that. Uh, remember, the original slogan of the revolution was neither east nor west,
Hmm. Yeah.
but they've been forced basically uh, to rely a lot on Russia and China, but those powers are not really willing to stick out their neck for Iran. So
Exactly.
they might have to do what North Korea did, which is basically become a hermit state.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and that's not going to solve the internal problems. The difference, of course, I see is the North Korea has the bomb, and
Yeah.
Iran doesn't have it,
Yeah.
uh, and that's what when people something think about a regime change. If the regime change is the Revolutionary Guards taking over, they might think much more in terms of North Korea, and
Yeah.
the only way they can survive as a hermit state is, in fact, having the bomb.
Yeah. So actually, this might accelerate the development of a nuclear bomb instead of really slow it down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Also, I think the current supreme leader, Khamenei, is in an advancing age, right? Like he's pretty old. We see the current threat of power. You have the clergy and the revolution guards, and also the civilian technocrats. In the inevitable power vacuum that followed the supreme leader left the world, who do you predict will come out on top? Witnessing a slow transition from theocracy to a military dictatorship run by the IRGC.
Actually, the Constitution was very savvy to make sure there'd be a sort of line of succession.
Yeah,
And when Khomeini died, the expectation was he was such a formative person, no
yeah,
one would replace him.
yeah,
In fact, the Constitution is structured in such a way that there will be an easy transition to
Mm-hmm.
the next.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of basically clauses in how to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be either one person, even someone who is not very well known, could be elected as the supreme leader, or you could have a council of religious figures taking over. So that's not a problem. Um, and I think the Revolutionary Guards need some sort of uh, fig leaf,
Mm-hmm.
sort of basically form of legitimacy. It wouldn't be a great legitimacy, but it's better than being purely naked force of the Revolutionary Guards. So it would be in their interest to have some sort of one cleric at the top or three clerics at the top who give them some sort of religious aura.
Got it. Got it. So basically, you could have military dictatorship, but they would not change the structure. They basically put some puppy in the top to kind of stabilize the country, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So many Iranians want change, right? But they look the border Middle East and fear the regime change could lead to chaos and even a worsened situation, which happens a lot in the past. When you have a revolution, you often have a more authoritarian regime come into power than the previous one. So in the current political impasses inevitable due to Iran's geography and the ethnic composition, do you think that's like because of Iran's unique position, or if the regime fails, right, is there any genuine risk of the state collapse, like what happened in Iraq or Syria or Libya, like adjacent countries?
Yes, I mean, Iran has a great national identity,
Hmm.
long identity. The educational system has stressed the importance of national identity too for the last 50 years.
Hmm.
There is a strong sense of Iranness,
Hmm.
but important. But there's also exists in certain areas of Iran an ethnic identity.
Hmm.
So it's not only one national identity, but also ethnic identities, such as among the Kurds, the Baluchis, the Arabs, and to some extent among Turkish speakers.
Hmm.
Large percentage of the population is Turkish speaking. Um, so when you have a society that looks so very unified because there's a sort of state national identity, it's often forgotten that there is also simmering underneath it ethnic identities.
Hmm.
When there's a crisis, it's easy for outside powers to actually, only with a little bit of basically nudging,
Hmm.
create a much more ethnic divisions.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, look at Yugoslavia. For years, under Tito, it seemed like Yugoslavia was a viable state. I traveled in Yugoslavia actually under Tito, and I was looking for this, and everyone I talked to assured me, sure, in the past there'd been ethnic differences between Serbians, Bosnians,
Hmm.
the Muslims, Croatians, and so on. And it felt like there was a real viable Yugoslav nationality.
Hmm.
Uh, but after Tito died and things became a bit wobbly, some European powers, neighbors, were actually very much interested in dismantling
Yeah.
Yugoslavia and was easily to incite, massacres, whether
Yeah.
it's between Serbians or Croatians or Muslims. And that became a horror story as a result of that.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of ethnic divisions.
Yeah. As you know, like the current political discourse often present a binary choice. It's either the current clerical regime or the return of Pahlavi monarchy. Do you think there could be a third way for Iran? Like there could be a modern day Mossadegh, like 2026 Mossadegh happening in Iran. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, yes, I mean I think the sentiment in the street, especially,
Hmm.
is for actually some sort of, I would say liberal, but some sort of democracy. Uh,
Hmm.
and often the cries you see in the street are liberty, equality, the
Hmm.
notion that people have rights, and it's not that the state shouldn't tell you what to do or not
Yeah.
to, what to dress and so on. And that doesn't mean people are anti-religious, but they're feeling as that religion is a private affair, and
Hmm.
what you believe in has nothing to do with the state.
Yeah.
So I think that the culture, the popular culture, is very actually ready for some sort of democracy.
Hmm.
The question is, how can you transfer political authority of the state that likes to monopolize power to a much more open system?
Hmm.
It is possible. I mean, someone like Mossad could appear, even someone from the regime who is open-minded enough to do that. That's, I think, a good hope for the future. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think even like say we have a regime change, the clerical class get out of the power, right? They're no longer the supreme leader in Iran society, but that class still remains socially and economically powerful in the Iran society. Do you think Iran could be doomed to a cycle of revolution and restoration, like over and over again? Basically, they put monarchy back, and then there will be another revolution like in 1979 happen again.
No, because I think the clergy, the ones that are not actually in power, they were quite happy to be basically distant from the state, not to have
Hmm.
power. They would still retain their social power, uh,
Hmm.
even economic power in terms of foundation, endowments. The church equivalent to churches here. And many of them actually are not that happy having been associated with the state.
Got
So
it.
the clergy are not necessarily eager to have control over the state.
Yeah.
Uh, so they're not the ones that are going to be actually counter-revolutionary if there was a democracy set up.
Yeah. So when President Trump come back to the White Office for the second term, right? He's doing this maximum pressure campaign on Iran, which kind of definitely lead to the current economic collapse and currency collapse in Iran society. Like, how do you think the Iranian young people view America? Do you think Trump's action and current state of American politics diminish the appeal of the American model in Iranian youth?
Well, I don't think they don't know what's happening in the United States and follow
Hmm.
that. I mean, some of the, I guess, much more savvy would follow the press and know what's that democracy is being rapidly eroded in the United
Hmm.
States.
Yeah.
But what they see is they hate if you hate the regime and someone comes along and says, "I'm going to help you against your detested regime," people naturally say, "Oh, good, I'll take your support."
Yeah.
But I think what's happened in the last few days is actually significant
Yeah.
because in Iranian history, the oil issue was very important. You
Yeah.
know, Mossad they wanted to say we should have our oil. The Brits at that time wanted to get our oil,
Yeah.
and the British attitude was, "Why is our British oil under your ground? We're going to take it back." And what Trump has done with Venezuela
Hmm.
is revived that memory because now people openly see that Trump is actually focused on Venezuela because he's saying American oil is on the Venezuelan ground. I'm going
Yeah.
to take it back.
Yeah, exactly.
So if he does that with Venezuela, why not with Iran too?
Yeah. So that as you think that could change the perception, like from American, if American to invade Iran, like the Iranian people would probably have a very complicated view on that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So I think the invasion of Iran by the United States, probably supported by Israel, could happen, right? Like I almost thought it would happen like this weekend, but it seems like they tuned down the rhetoric nowadays. Do you think that's a realistic possibility? Like Trump would invade Iran and really try to occupy the country?
No, I mean it's a big country. I don't think the U.S. has that manpower or will to do it.
Yeah.
But so their alternative, and I think they're aware of that. So what is their strategy?
Hmm.
If they know they can't invade, and just the pressure isn't going to bring about a regime change, the strategy then is obviously destruction of the state.
Hmm. So they basically set up some kind of puppy proxy war, right? Like inside Iran, like support certain protest groups, like militarize certain areas, and then try to have them fight against each other, right? Basically start a civil war in Iran.
Yeah, people forget, when there were demonstrations started against in Syria against the
Hmm.
government, there was a massive import of American arms.
Yeah.
Some of it actually went to the jihadists,
Oh.
to ISIS, and but some of it went to other groups, Kurds, Druzes, and so on. So basically, Syria broke apart because you had armed groups all over the place.
Hmm.
So that may be what they're planning to do with Iran, because if the other alternatives are not there, it's easy to pour arms into the country, especially when you have some ethnic issues, which, especially in Kurdistan, Baluchistan, in the Arab territories, even among the Turkish minority. You just pour in the arms, and there'll be basically the consequence will be ethnic violence.
Yeah. So, do you think the current regime, after looking at the example of North Korea, may finally cross the threshold and weaponize its nuclear program as a deterrent?
Oh, that's unknown. I mean, c- Trump claimed he'd solved the problem because he bombed the main installations. We don't know how much damage it did. Uh,
Yeah.
And the Iranians have been quite smart about that. That basically their attitude is, if you think you did that, that's fine. You can
Yeah.
leave that. But we don't know actually how much uranium there is and what's happening with it. So if the revolution, I mean, the present government have advisors, civilians who are much in favor of some sort of settlement with
Mhm.
United States. But with the Revolutionary Guards, if they were totally in power, I don't think there would be any moderation with them.
Mm.
They would follow much more the North Korean model.
Yeah. So, some scholars argue the West, which we represent the moral high ground, should actively intervene to liberate Iran. As a historian, do you view U.S. ideological pressure as a genuine effort to support the freedom, or it's simply a tool for hegemony, like global hegemony?
Well, we can just take the example of Iraq
Yeah.
or Libya. I mean, how much was rhetoric about, especially for internal consumption, American consumption, how much did they really believe that they were going to be creating democracy? I mean, I was teaching a course on Iraq before the invasion. We
Yeah.
read a lot of books about Iraq, and my students basically had scratched their heads when I thought, whenever Bush talked about democracy, because
Yeah.
knew anything about Iraqi history, the basically once you broke the central government, it was 100% sure that there would be fragmentation in the whole society.
Yeah.
All the conventional books on Iraq basically led you to that.
Yeah.
Somehow in Washington, they built up this notion that the country was dying for democracy. And all they
Yeah.
had to do was get rid of Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem nowadays, particularly for the neoconservative part ideology. They always believe that, yeah, we are the good guy, they're the bad guy. Those are non-democratic government, those are evil government. We have to get rid of them to liberate the people. They have that moral argument, which is hard to argue against because just from the ideology perspective, everybody wants to be liberated, to have freedom, to have
Yeah.
rights, have human rights, right?
Yeah.
However, on the other side, when you look at the reality, all the history just tell you this is such a bad idea. It kills more people, it kills more civilian. The country become a rubber state, like all it's become super dysfunctional. There's no rule of law, and it's a warm bed for the extremist groups like ISIS, right? Those terrorist groups kind of grow out of that chaos. So, from a historian perspective, how do we break this kind of cycle? Because right now in the Western media, they often talk about, oh, we are trying to save the Iranian people. We are trying to stop the government from massacring their civilians, which is part of them is true. But again, the consequence of your activity will create another bigger chaos, which is often not talked about enough.
Well, I mean, I think the way to deal with it is to show the hypocrisy. I mean, they're talking now about military intervention to prevent civilians being killed.
Yeah,
The last 2 years, U.S. has been backing up Israel in
yeah, exactly.
killings. You know,
Yeah,
nowadays people openly say, what Israel carried out genocide.
yeah, exactly.
But it was done with United States endorsement, U.S. arms and U.S. money. So for the U.S. to suddenly turn around and say they're in Iran, involved in Iran, especially militarily, to save Iranians from being killed, it's just so hypocritical. It'd be hard to actually sell that line.
I think majority I would say like probably this is also divided in the ideology ground. So if you look at the Trump supporters, like those neocon warmonger, those senators like Lindsey Graham, for example, he's like pounding the table. We're going to liberate the Iranian people. On the other hand, he's supporting Israel doing genocide in Gaza, like for 2 years, completely 2 years. He didn't say a thing about like liberating the people, the Palestinians. So I think for those type of the supporters, they don't really have the critical thinking, or they tend to believe whatever the supreme leader like Trump says, like in the media. How do we kind of break that barrier? Like,
Yeah. Well, Graham can talk like that, but actually, if there was actually a need for rounding up American troops or National Guard to go
mm,
to and to occupy it, then they'll have second thoughts about that.
yeah, I think there's going to be a huge backlash because American lives, if any soldier got killed in that war or whatever that intervention, Trump's support base will have a civil war internally because a certain part of the MAGA base is against the war, against any foreign interventions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of my audience actually have a very interesting question. They're curious about how does Iranian people view the Chinese? Because I know like nowadays the current regime is actually working with China to do business and sustain some of the economic activities. But some others would argue that China is actually supporting such a authoritarian regime, which is suppressing its own people. What's your perspective on that?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I think for many Iranians, uh, China is actually a successful model
Mhm.
for economic development. So they're in awe of the Chinese model. I don't think it's a model that it could be replicated in Iran, but many people actually thought that way. There was a
Mhm.
famous president in Iran who actually was sort of openly saying that Iran should follow the Chinese model. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's very different, partly because the Iranian working class is much more actually assertive,
Hmm.
has a long tradition of labor activities, and
Hmm.
create a disciplined, cheap labor in Iran is a uh, pie in the sky. It's not feasible to do that.
That's because of the culture, right? Like the cultural difference, you think?
Uh, yeah, cultural people are much more assertive uh,
Mm.
about rights, especially if
Mm.
they're being exploited. So it's you don't have that sort of pool of disciplined labor.
Yeah. So I think China and Iran are all like, countries with a long history, and they also take pride in their identity, right? I would say like in recent centuries, China has adopted a very successful model, but part of that pieces is like a really good relationship with the United States. Why didn't Iranian government kind of adopt that route? I know like 1979 that the abduction of uh, the American embassy, right? Like you kind of
Yeah.
create a scar on that. But like why didn't the government try to kind of move away from that ideology? Is that kind of locked in because of the clergic regime?
Well, there were two lines. I mean,
Mm,
on the rhetoric,
mm,
in the street for demonstrations, the regime often used these silly slogans, death to United States,
yeah.
death to Israel. This was mostly rhetoric.
Hmm.
But when you came down to actually negotiations, the Iranian governments, even conservative ones, very pro-clerical ones, were willing to negotiate a compromise with the United States.
Hmm.
So it wasn't like they were unwilling to do it. In
Got
fact,
it.
they would have followed the Chinese model about a rapprochement with the United States. It was always a United States, like, with the exception of Obama. The other United States presidents, including after Bush, and then more recently with the Democratic
Biden?
president, what you got was their unwillingness to negotiate or
Yeah.
thinking that if they put more pressure, they would get a better bargain. So they're on the whole, U.S.-Iran relationship has been determined by the United States rather than by Iran.
Do you think
Uh,
Israel play a huge role in this? Because, Benjamin Netanyahu, he basically came to US Congress in the 90s, like pounding around the table, say we have to invade Iran, we have to dismantle the Iran government. Do you think that plays a huge role in the US foreign policy with Iran?
yeah, I mean, the reason Netanyahu was so upset was because Obama actually made an agreement with Iran.
Yeah, the JCPOA, right? Like
Yeah.
he
So
actually
that
went to the
was the only
Congress.
period
Yeah.
where the American president was willing to actually negotiate with Iran.
Hmm.
And there have been other periods where even you have a despicable regime in Iran, they were willing to negotiate. It was
Mm.
the negotiation came from United States.
Yeah. So do you think because of the Israel's influence on US policymakers, probably until the time when the Israel lobby do not take control of the Americans president and senators, we could have a final negotiation with Iran, like the US? Because I think from my perspective as American, right? The Iranian doesn't pose any threat to America. Like even though they are advancing certain technology, they have no incentive to really bomb US. However, for Israel, that's a different story because they're all regional power in Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think it's also it goes back to basically after the revolution, 79,
Mhm.
when the US lost basically its embassy in Tehran. What they did was they outsourced US policy on Iran to Israel.
Yeah.
So basically, they said the Israelis know what's happening in Iran. We'll rely on Israel to tell us what's going on, and we'll rely on them. So the advice always on how to deal with Iran was actually in Washington. The decision was made by Israel. The
Hmm.
exception was Obama when he said we need to actually come to an agreement with Iran.
Yeah.
That's what then Netanyahu basically became frantic, and he invited himself to Congress
Yeah.
to appeal to the Republicans and AIPAC to say this was the worst agreement you could have signed.
Yeah.
And so then Trump basically echoed the same. This was the worst agreement America's ever signed. In fact, it was a very good agreement, and no,
Yeah.
people who denounced it didn't read it. And it would the present crisis wouldn't exist if the agreement was actually kept.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually made a video just describing that part of the history because it's very tough negotiation. Iranian within itself, like you have the moderate one who want to negotiate with US, and you also have the extreme party, which like will be the hardliners. We're never going to negotiate with Americans or the Israel. And I think what Trump did, withdrawing from that JCPOA, really killed the moderate because their argument failed. The hardlining will say, look, when you spend all this effort, energy negotiate with the Americans, and 3 years later they withdraw. What's the outcome of this? It's
Yeah.
horrible, right? So I think it's really sad situation to watch right now because of the withdrawal of that agreement.
But what is interesting is if you look at the mainstream media in America,
Hmm.
yesterday there was a long op-ed piece in the New York Times. They talk about all these conflicts between Iran and United States. They have a complete amnesia about that agreement and that
Yeah,
it was the United States that actually destroyed that agreement. It's
yeah.
as if that agreement never existed.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
I think it's a propaganda machine, like it just try to sell the story that Iran is such a evil regime. We have to really dismantle it. There's no other way around. I think that's what they try to sell.
yeah. Or, I mean, I don't think it's basically from the top instructed to do that. It's just basically tunnel vision
I know.
that they perceive it the way to actually uh, they're in a way from hindsight or from historical background see the situation. So for them, if they're horrendous mistakes, it's always on the other side,
Yeah.
not on our side.
The problem I kind of see the argument that Benjamin Netanyahu is presenting is I just don't see any way around from like I think his goal is really just to destroy the current state of the Iranian government and make Iran into a dysfunctional state. There's no other way around. Like he will say, oh, if you negotiate with the Iranian people and the Iranian government, you sign that JCPOA, that's a terrible agreement, and they're going to use that money they're going to make from that lifting all the sanctions. They're going to really develop the technology, and eventually they are going to build a nuclear bomb. It's not falsifiable because you're just like asserting those things that didn't happen. I
Yeah.
don't know how you can actually argue with Netanyahu because his vision, his goal is already set. There's only one outcome out of this. Like he wanted to dismantle Iran's government.
Yeah, I won't say that. I mean, he keeps on saying that he loves Iran, he loves the Iranians. Uh, they could have a good friend relationship. But if you can't negotiate, or even if you negotiate, then you pull the rug out of it, uh,
Yeah.
then I think the logic leads to what you said, that the intention is a dismantling of the state.
I think he doesn't want to negotiate. He doesn't like to negotiate. If you look at the history, like he just killed all the negotiators. Like if you send a top negotiator to negotiation site, they have those snipers or other drone attacks just kill those negotiators. I don't know how they negotiate like by doing that. So what do you think could be the outcome of the current protest? I kind of see the rhetoric kind of tune down a little bit. I part of the reason I think Trump decided not to attack Iran is all the other surrounding countries like Qatar, they say, oh, you cannot use our military side to attack Iran for this time. I think those kind of push Trump back, not really attack Iran now.
That I think is an element, yeah.
Hmm.
I'm not sure even if they attack, whether that will solve the problem. I mean, the way I can see it is the present sort of no war, no peace, but constant tension
Hmm.
continuing indefinitely. Because if
Yeah.
the regime is not going to collapse, and actually there's no also feasible possibility of invasion and occupation, then it's an ongoing crisis, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just feel it's really unfortunate that Trump and the other leaders that say, "Oh, we're standing with the Iranian people. You guys should just continue to protest." And then the government commit this massacre, kill a lot of Iranian people, and then they did nothing. They just say, "Oh, I think the Iranian government is behaving better. Like they say they're going to hang 800 people. Now they stop it. So we're going to de-escalate the tension." What about those people who believed in your propaganda and go on the street, like protest?
Well, I mean, or actually the protests, people will protest other ways rather than going into the demonstration.
Exactly.
It, uh, or some people might even rally around the government. So it's not a one-way street.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest difference between the nowadays protest and the revolution happening in 1979 is the army's attitude, right? I think right now the supreme leader did not lose any control or any support from the Revolutionary Guards. So a lot of people who say, "Oh, if the U.S. not really invading Iran, the regime will just continue to exist."
Well, the Shah had a huge military,
Hmm.
one of the biggest militaries, but in fact, it was a conscript army.
Hmm.
He could rely on 7,000 imperial guards.
Hmm.
7,000. That was the only real reliable force, 7,000. You can't carry out even a coup with a 7,000.
Yeah,
The present regime has basically a very ideological revolutionary guards
yeah.
who are volunteers or specially chosen from families that support the regime.
Hmm.
But these are people who are willing to go out and kill civilians on large
Yeah,
scales.
yeah. So, what do you think about the support of the current supreme leader? I know, like the clergic regime, they typically have a lot of grassroots support, like from the very poor class, the people who have no land or any like, income. Those are the typical supporter for the clergic regime. Is that the case? Because like a lot of protesters, they're the bazaar class. They actually have money. They have some influence in the political system.
It's not the very poor. It's much
Hmm.
more actually support from small farmers, countryside,
Hmm.
sons of, I would say, lower middle class,
Yeah.
who come from very traditional religious families.
Hmm.
They're especially recruited into the Revolutionary Guards.
Hmm.
Uh, so for them, there is no cultural clash.
Hmm.
So there is also between them and the demonstrators, there's a class difference because many demonstrators are often educated or from the modern middle class or are university students. So that is then seen in terms of class difference,
Hmm.
which in a way reinforces the strength of the Revolutionary Guards.
Hmm. Yeah, it's right now I don't see any way of this Revolution Guard turn against the supreme leader. Even though you see the social unrest, but like when they counted the number, they think that that's nowhere comparable to the 1979, right? You have 3 million people on the street
Yeah, exactly.
protesting. Yeah. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Is there any possibility they can like vote in public for change of the constitution? Because like, 1979, when Khomeini does gain the power, he did it through this rush voting on the constitution.
I mean, the actual Constitution has clauses
Hmm.
where you can amend the Constitution. They've already amended the Constitution when Khomeini died,
Hmm.
so that Khomeini could succeed him. So that there is a precedent for amendments or changes. So there is on paper that,
Hmm.
but I don't think the present structure will permit that unless there is so much continued pressure from below.
Hmm.
The rational thing then would be to sort of change the constitution to make it less theocratic, more secular, and that would stabilize the regime. But again, you need a lot of foresight and flexibility on people who have authority to do that.
Hmm. I heard like reported by the news, there are thousands of Iranian people got killed in the during this social unrest and protest, in the street. Do you think that kind of caused the current regime lose legitimacy? I think like when this protest happens, that means like they're already losing the legitimacy because a lot of people are against the current regime.
Yeah, I mean, the bloodshed, I think, increases tensions, but the regime is now actually arguing that some of the people killed are killed by the demonstrators, and that
Hmm.
it's people from the Revolutionary Guards that are getting killed. So
Yeah,
they're using this also as a way of bolstering the regime.
yeah, I definitely see their reporting on the Revolution Guard got killed. Like there's like hundreds of them, like 100 something. Because of the protesters, they have weapons. Like this weapon must come
Yeah,
from other foreign
yeah.
imported, right?
I mean, the regime claims that. I don't know if it's true, but it's probably a good propaganda line to follow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's I don't know. It's very sad to see what happened nowadays in Iran, and I just feel like it's a deadlock. It's probably going to stay in this format for a while because the current regime won't collapse unless the U.S. Invade the country. But the U.S. also face a huge consequence if they do that, and also it's going to be end up in a very worse situation because the history kind of tell us repeatedly that will happen. What do you think could be a possible outcome, like a good outcome, kind of this current situation?
I can't see a good outcome unless, people at the top in Iran, well, I mean, both in Iran and Washington, if Washington agreed to some sort of settlement, which means going back to the Obama agreement, which they
Hmm.
say well, they're not going to do that. So that excludes that regard. Uh, Iran can also open up, but whether that would solve the problem is not doesn't deal with it because they can open up, but the sanctions will continue. The economic crisis will
Yeah.
continue.
Do you think the U.S. and the Israel government may do something what they did to the Venezuela? They do special operation and capture the supreme leader. That style, like they just like kidnap him and then take him back to Washington for trial.
Well, it's a stunt. I mean, what they did is not a success in Venezuela. It's a stunt for
Hmm.
the American TV watchers that
Yeah.
US can do this, but it doesn't solve the problem. The same regime is still in
Yeah, in
Venezuela.
power. Yeah.
So they have a guy in Brooklyn in prison,
Yeah.
and Trump says he's going to basically run the oil in Venezuela, but no oil company really wants to go in there. They know
Yeah.
how unstable it is. So that I mean, even if they grab Khamenei, I don't know how is that going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I kind of see. I still think the better way is just like form some kind of negotiation, go back to the JCPOA style nuclear settlement agreement, have international organization go in Iran, check out those nuclear facilities, ensure both parties kind of follow that agreement, and then have a peaceful transformation of Iran society. That would be really ideal
Yeah.
ideal situation. Yeah.
but that's all in the hands of Washington, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Do you think Iran's current situation is the outcome of the tragedy of the state power competition in the global format? Because US and also Israel, they want to dominate the region, and Iran is a regional power. That's why like it was targeted by both countries.
Yeah, I mean, Iran also could have been much more savvy on how to deal with that.
Hmm.
Right after the revolution, the hostage crisis was unnecessary. It was nothing
Yeah.
to do with Iran's regional power. It was basically to create a clerical republic. That was the
Hmm.
agenda of the. So those use of those foreign issues to strengthen internal power of the clergy had its costs, and they didn't. The government in Iran should have thought about the costs.
Hmm. Yeah.
They were arrogant about that. They could deal with that. Uh, but so actions have their costs, and it's basically created a much more of an antagonistic situation both between Iran and Israel and United States. But
Mm.
even if those things had not been there, I think you're right. There is a question of state rivalry,
Hmm.
and Israel and U.S. saw Iran as basically a state rival in the region.
Yeah. I saw there's some comment in my video about Iran history. They basically say that Khomeini, they are basically communist disguised as a clergy class. So you don't think that's a reasonable argument? There's no similarity between those two ideology. I mean, they think that communist ideology is also similar to a religion ideology.
Yeah, but these guys are, I mean, these guys were vehemently anti-Marxist, anti-leftist. There was the idea, I mean, the Royalists created this myth that somehow the clergy had been educated in Moscow in secret places to,
Yeah.
uh, uh, it makes a good James Bond story, but there's
Yeah.
no evidence and no truth in that, no.
I know. If you look at the communist countries' history, they destroy all the religions. Like they don't want any religion or any like religion class.
Well, even if they did that, but the idea that somehow these guys in Iran, in control in Iran are linked to the Soviet Union. There is no Soviet Union now, so that's
Yeah. All right, Professor, what do you think about the current United States foreign policy compared to what China is adopting? China has been criticized for working with all this authoritarian regime, but on the other hand, if you look at U.S. Foreign policy, they put on sanctions, but for the country who got sanctioned, actually working with China may be supporting a lifeline. So how do you kind of view that in a like non-moral, like you can view it from moral perspective and non-moral perspective. Like how do you view that argument? Like which style of foreign policy is more favorable in your perspective?
I mean, I don't see that difference. I mean, both China and United States, their interest is their own basically national interests. So
Hmm.
in some places, they will deal with fairly despicable states if it's in their interest. Uh, if it's not interest, they might then talk about liberty, individualism, and stuff. Uh,
Yeah,
I think the US is more willing to use that language when they disagree with the state. Uh,
yeah,
the Chinese government are basically more down to earth. They say, we'll deal with everyone. It
yeah.
doesn't matter what their internal policies are.
Yeah. So basically, you see, like both countries actually adopt a pra pragmatic way of handling their foreign relationships. It's only different that I think our government, the United States government, have this ideology tool they can use when they try to invade countries like Iraq. Because on the other hand, they are working with Saudi Arabia. They have no problem of they killing
Yeah.
a U.S. citizen, like a U.S. green card holder in the embassy. Like they don't have any problem with that.
Well, I mean, now I think that there's a more complicated situation in that The U.S. Basically says its previous agreements have no meaning; they can change
Yeah,
overnight.
yeah,
The Chinese policy is much more basically predictable, that once we have an agreement, we keep it. There is a rule of law, international law will observe that.
yeah,
So for most countries, it makes more sense to have agreements with China rather than with the United States, because you don't know, or you could be a part of NATO, have a long relationship with the United States, and then one day the president gets up and says, "No, no, I'm not part of your territory.
yeah.
You're an ally." The Chinese don't behave that way.
Yeah, it pains me to watch the current U.S. government doing all those rhetoric and saying like we have to have Greenland and then splitting all these lies that the Russians and Chinese are going to occupy Greenland. No, they're not. They don't have anything around that place. Like U.S. has military forces staying in that region, like just right now on the Greenland, and we can put more troops on the Greenland if we want. We chose not to. Like now that we all of a sudden we want to take that territory. That just
Hmm.
pains me to watch it.
It's not even that. I mean, even trade agreements that you
Yeah,
sign and belong there. Suddenly you wake up and Washington says, no, we're changing the rules. I mean, the Chinese haven't done that so far that I know of. So,
yeah. I think it's just like I look at the headlines. A lot of Western leaders kind of all going to China and start to warm up the relationship. You know, this is basically a collapse of U.S. ally system. Basically,
yeah.
we just don't have any real allies. Like no allies can trust us anymore.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the Chinese government is, I think, more capitalistic than the American government, because
Yeah.
to have capitalism, you need some rule of law and predictability. And they're following that principle, where the US is actually breaking all those principles. So
Yeah.
uh, it's not good for business if you don't have some reliable rules to obey.
I know. Professor, I don't know if you follow the US domestic policy or like politics, but I think the midterm is coming. Do you see the Democrat Party may win back the House?
Yeah, I mean, the polls now seem to indicate that, yeah, the Republicans are in trouble, especially, I mean, not because of foreign policy, but economic situation. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, prices, inflation, the job market, uh, loss of health care, rising prices of health care, especially.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of people here, I think, I feel that they've been taken for a ride.
Yeah, I
to,
know.
so there might be a backlash in the elections. Of course, the Republicans also have means to try to limit that, and basically suppression of the vote and so on. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Do you worry that US may someday turn into an authoritarian regime? We kind of see some bad signs, like you have the ICE agent in Minnesota shooting American citizen, and all the lies that the current administration is splitting out in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, moving that way. I expect there'll be enough, basically counter movement from that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I firmly believe that some of the opposition parties and the movement will be happening because people are not happy about what happened under the Trump administration. I saw, look at the polls, 58% of the Americans think that Trump's first year of governance is a failure. So hopefully we'll see. Like it's really great honor to have you on the podcast, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you discussing Iran situation. I really hope the Iranian government can settle down, like just basically stabilize the situation and find a way out and negotiate a deal with the U.S. and probably Israel.
Okay, we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the program. Thank you.
Yeah.